Welcome to a special edition of Clinical Lab Chat, part of the MedCore Podcast Network. Today's episode is sponsored by Sysmex America, Inc. I'm Chris Wolski, Director of Business Intelligence for CLP, and today I'll be speaking with Danielle Johnson about best practices for clinical laboratory quality control and quality assurance programs. Dan is Assistant Director of Marketing for Informatics and Service at Sysmex America, Inc., leading the team responsible for introducing new digital innovations that shape and advance healthcare. Among these innovations are the CareSphere workflow solution, the CareSphere Analyzer Management, Sysmex Validation Solution, Beyond Care Quality Monitor, Automated Inventory Solutions, and Sysmex WAM, or WAM. Since taking over CLP more than a year ago, I've really gained an appreciation of laboratory operations and best practices. And one thing that I think we can't emphasize enough is QC and QA workflow processes. And Dan, I'm looking forward to learning a lot, and think our audience is as well, about all the things that they could do for better QC and QA processes. So I always like to start with the tough stuff. And Dan, so I'm going to put you on the line here. What's the top challenges labs face with QC and QA programs today?
Yeah, well, that is a tough one. I've identified kind of three areas where I feel there's top challenges with quality assurance and quality programs. First is that people don't view QC or quality assurance as a program, they view it more as a task. And the more that they view it as a task, I feel that it becomes a habit. And then the question is it a good habit or a bad habit that people fall into? So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that people are concerned about sharing their data. And this goes for patient data, but also QC data as well. And how can we, as a healthcare organization, or my organization, improve ourselves and everyone else if we don't have access to that data as well? And then following that second one, the third challenge is that now that we have the data, or if we ever get it, what do we do with it, right? As a my organization, we have good ideas what to do with it, but what about the laboratories? What about the healthcare systems? Are they even using quality control data to improve processes, or using the data that's from other quality aspects in the organization back into the lab and back to the patient? So those are the top challenges that I see with quality assurance programs or QC today.
Right, and one issue too that I think we've talked about when we were preparing for this program is that the difference between looking at QC and QA as a task versus a program. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that's kind of an issue too. If you just look at this as just a task-oriented issue as opposed to an overarching program. And what does that mean for labs and their workflow?
Exactly. So from a workflow perspective, I've seen people have a failed QC point and then they just rerun QC again. And they rerun it again and again and again until it's in, and then they can move on with their day. So something that Albert Einstein said is that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same results. And it's just insane that I feel that people just run QC and they view it as like a task. The component of that is that when QC fails, it's actually an art to fix it. And people don't like spending time crafting this art or spending time trying to understand if it's a reagent issue. If it's something with the analyzer, it could be that the gauges are going off, they're not clicking at the right number of clicks so you can get the right number of fluids to their systems. And they're just rerunning the QC, expecting to go in and be good to go. And that's where I feel that it's becoming more of a task than versus a program. And adding to that is that there's other components for a QC or QA program. Is that when was the maintenance last performed? How did it compare to the other analyzers? And where did it compare to a bigger peer mean group? Once we have this information, this is great. But a lot of this information that we have is that it's reactive in nature. So they're waiting for the failed QC point instead of also being proactive. And we've seen that laboratories have had limited staff, and we've been saying that every vendor out there has been saying that there's limited staff that labs have, so they really have a struggle being proactive with QC and QA programs. And what I'm trying to do is like, well, how do we make this a proactive program? And I think that's one of the key components of moving this from a task into a program. If we start becoming this on the other side, being reactive, they're just going to react. It's going to create that bad habit that we were talking about before, right? It
Right.
just deeply ingrains into it. And so we need to move forward to being proactive. And the components of that being proactive is having real time data at your fingertips and that it's actionable. And that I'll talk about a little bit later because it's a huge component for this is also becoming automated as well. How do we automate
Right.
actionable insights for that? And we've done this before at my organization where we actually track. It's really crazy. We know a lot about devices via of our Internet of Things. We call it SNCS, but we're able to dial into our systems and monitor how much electricity and power is going to a laser on our systems. And if that
Right.
laser starts increasing a little bit and a little bit more, we actually get a flag in our systems and we automatically send a service engineer out there. And that's a
Wow.
huge component of a proactive quality assurance program and not just an application or a software. Even though I'm the software guy, we need to think beyond that simple aspect is that we need to be proactive. Because if we can fix a problem before it starts, then you won't have to have that bad QC point and have that tech that reruns QC over and over again, just like Albert Einstein said. It's just insanity, right? Because they're
Yeah.
expecting a different result.
And it's also more efficient in terms of, and not just, you're getting through that, you know, you're getting that machine back recalibrated, but it's also, you're saving that technician's time. You're being able to run the tests that those clinicians and those patients want to know the answers to. And you're saving materials too. You're not having downtime on the machine. You're not wasting materials as well.
Absolutely. And that all aligns to improving the workflows. And when we consider being proactive, real time quality program, it ends up saving everyone's time and eventually the patient because they get the results out right the first time. And the key component is that they get them out consistently because then it becomes a true quality and control program.
Right, for sure. Yeah, and you've talked a little bit about data a couple times and that's some challenge. You have data, what do you do with it? Talk a little bit about that and what does that mean to use your data properly, I guess, for a QA or a QC program. So how should labs be looking at their data, at least in the context of a QA or QC program?
Another great question. Even going into the laboratory with data, I think there's a really neat analogy we can start with is that with consumer data, right? I actually recently got a new dog and I'm very happy with it. And
Congrats.
thank you. And I'm on my phone and my phone's near me and I'm talking about dog food and crates and all of a sudden on my social media, guess what pops up?
Right.
All the dog foods and crates and stuff like that Amazon wants to sell me and all this fun stuff. So we're getting used to this consumerization of data and how it's being used. But when we take that and then move it into the laboratory and even the healthcare system space, reference lab, it doesn't matter, healthcare space, data becomes a very hoarded aspect. And it's almost like we're trying to create and there's that saying that data is a gold mine and we're try to get as much as it underneath this as possible. But it doesn't make sense to me because if we hoard the data, we don't know what to do with it. It's another
Right.
conversation. But all of a sudden, I feel that it's in the wrong spot. It should be everyone's data to share, especially if we're trying to improve overall healthcare outcomes. And I think that when we have QC and QA operational data, I think that's even a benefit even more to share. It's not patient data. So I think people can adjust to starting with sharing that QC and QA data. And with that information, I feel that they can start seeing trends. They can put into a bigger database. They can say, hey, a lab in California is seeing somewhere the lab in Germany is seeing, right? And seeing these trends. So they're not wasting it. We're talking about workflows, not wasting their time trying to fix the same problem because they found issues with the reagents or they found issues with the type of lot number of the laser that was an issue. So having this data available and shared is much more powerful than sitting under a huge mine of it with no actual thought or ability to mine that data.
Right. Let's talk about solutions then. So I think data, you're a data guy, and I think data is, and particularly what you're talking about to a certain, if I understand it too, is one of the big negatives is if you silo data, and that's always, a recipe for failure, no matter where, what industry you're working in. And now I know you talked a little bit about Internet of Things. What about big data? I mean, is that something that's coming out because of things like Internet of Things and all this data we're getting out? I mean, how do labs take that concept of the big data concept, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what that is, and make it mean something for the labs and for their labs and for QA and QC programs?
Yeah, it's another great question. So for the Internet of Things, a lot of organizations are moving towards it. They probably have it, but they don't call it that yet.
Right.
But to kind of level set for everyone to understand, it's basically an application where we go and pull data safely from a system, so we can use that data to do the preventative maintenance I was talking about, checking on the lasers. There's even new software that I've been working on that auto predicts the amount of reagents that are used on a system, so you can get a really cool shopping list to know that this is how much I should order for next month, and predict the seasonality and all that fun stuff. So this is what we're using this Internet of Things for. And at Sysmex, my organization, we process 500 million quality control points a year. And so we're sitting on a huge mountain of information, and we're able to use that data. And this is one of the issues that challenges we're trying to overcome. It's like, how do we smartly use those 500 million points? And what we've done is that we've seen we can able to identify trends in QC. We're able to look at drift. And one cool point about our QC material that we use on our hematology systems is that it's an organic material. It's made of a bunch of cells. And if you notice over time, these cells start degrading organically, right? They break down.
Right.
So when you have your package insert that someone gives you, the day one is perfect, right? But when you look at day 30 or day 60, the ranges organically drift because the cells. But does the packet insert state that? No. So what we've done with the big data is that we process all of this, and in real time keep on microprocessing as more people start sharing this information via the Internet of Things into our cloud, and adjust those ranges as we get closer to the end of the lot. And what that does mean for the workflows in the lab is that when they run the patient, the QC sample on day 1 and day 60, that the ranges are dynamic, that they'll have less QC issues because they actually have the right range at the right time because of the life cycle of that QC product. And we've been doing this for years, actually. And that's why people really love our systems, because they always seem in, because they actually are in, because we accommodate these organic drifts within our products. And that's one of the examples of having the big data in our laboratory.
Yeah. That's great. So now QC and QA programs are really, and I'm not a laboratorian, so this is, as I understand it, about standardizing processes. And you've talked a little, I think you've kind of touched on this a little bit. How are you addressing that at Sysmex? I mean, how should labs, at least in general, address standardizing their processes and workflows?
Standardizing workflows, there's two major components of it in my mind. First, it's automation. As soon as we start automating our rules, our processes, the procedures, then we can have this consistency, which leads to my second component, which is standardization. And with automating and standardizing, we're able to predict when QC is going to go out. We're able to upload the way that QC is sent to our good QC points rather are sent to our big data, because we don't want to contaminate it with a bad QC point. And when I say about automation, is that there's our packet insert says to invert our QC vial a couple dozen times. I can't. It's been a long time since I read a package insert, but it says invert it so many times. So if we have some lab in Hawaii that's doing it 10 times, and some lab in all the way across the globe in Taiwan that's doing it another 10, like 15 times or 30 times, then that QC point may not fall in the same spot. So we need to start considering automation, and we can't just look at software for that as well. We've actually really thoughtfully designed new automation components that actually auto mix the sample. So it does it consistently
Mm.
50 times. So we're having the right points. So then it comes to my desk and says, okay, now that we have this really cool system that really starts automating these things, I'm like, oh, great. Now I have a peer mean group that has two different populations. Ones that use this system that highly automates and standardize it, and then there's people who use it manual by hand. So how do you then start differentiating those two as well, so you can have the right peer mean group? So there's some examples of like the when you start going into the weeds to start standardizing and automating, not everyone can do those two because they might have not the right components and so on and so forth.
That brings up the automation part of this that you're just talking about, the standardization. Also, I just want to go back and revisit something we were talking about a couple minutes ago.
Mhm.
The idea of the art of QC and QA. I mean, you even with these standardized processes and such, you still have to have technician. Yeah, as a technician or laboratory manager, you have to build flexibility within the system because there is problem solving that you're still going to have to do if there is an issue. Right?
Correct.
Or am I misunderstanding what you're saying here?
Yeah. So that's a really great point of how do we add the arts and make everyone an artist, right? For QA and QC. And what we've actually done is start designing concepts of automated troubleshooting. So people then we take like the complexity out of it. And what we're doing is that with our newest generation of QC software tools, is that when we start seeing QC problems on the analyzer, we identify it, we show it as like, hey, we have an issue here, and we actually give them recommendations on how to troubleshoot that. And we've mined our big data to say, hey, once error 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comes up, the best solution is to do a flow cell cleanse. And once
Okay.
they do that cleanse, then rerun QC instead of immediately rerunning QC. Because if you start doing that, you're doing what Albert Einstein said again, which is
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
rerunning
It's a
the
lot of
exact same.
insanity
Right.
processes. Yeah.
So we're trying to do the whole Bob Ross paint by number,
Right.
implementing that into our software. So because we know they're busy laboratories as well, and then
Right.
so adding on to that since we're kind of going the software design aspect with standardization and consistency, is that we've also designed it to have one dashboard where you can see everything at once. So it's standard. So you say, hey, I see this problem here, and identify it and see these type of trends automatically. So there's a lot of consideration where we're trying to artfully, I guess, design our software. So it takes a lot of the mystery out that and makes everyone an expert.
Okay. Great. And certainly that's where your big data kind of comes into play again, with the problem solving aspects. All right. So you mentioned a few times internationally. Sysmex I know has an international presence as well. So beyond the U.S., what are some of the challenges that you're seeing across the globe?
There's a lot, good challenges and not.
Okay.
So there's a lot of them. I've had the opportunity to observe people run patients and run QC, and sometimes QC is an option in some countries.
Right.
They don't run it.
Yeah.
They just assume that the analyzer is good to go. They only see issues when they're running patients, and they're not doing patient moving averages. They're just watching it like, wow, everyone's really low for white blood cells. There might be a problem. That's how they actually QC. So it's, we're talking about best practices, but I've seen bad practices there. So it's trying to get everyone to this right, at least a basic level of what QC is, and run consistently through the globe. And there's things we can do, mechanisms, engineering controls, like using software applications that warn you, that recommend these are the steps you should be taking as well. A lot of the world globally also is standardizing to ISO standards, but there's a lot of odd interpretations with these types of standards. Even our in the United States, we have CAP and CLIA, and globally,
Right.
adopt in certain areas, but those standards are interpreted a little differently everywhere. For example, when you run QC for reagent change, when you have concentrated reagents, how often do you get to run QC? If it's auto diluted, there's a lot of like nuances that a lot of innovative vendors are coming out with these type of solutions, but they're not really addressing QC or quality programs as part of launching like new reagents or new operational improvements like concentrated reagents. And on the other hand, when I've seen, if we're talking about these countries or customers who only run QC once a week or not at all, we have countries like Germany who have really Bach rules, which are really strict. They're complex. They don't make sense in all disciplines. These are my opinions, by the way.
Sure, of course.
It's hard to design in software just dedicated really Bach rules. But at the time, we had to accommodate that. So they might be at this
Right.
level that it's at a super high peak of quality control before patient results are being out there. And then we have some people that are just happenstance. Yeah, I'll run it when I have time. So
Right.
trying to get everyone on what a baseline is, what excellence looks like, and what the future will lead. And that could be some sort of really Bach hybrid or something along those lines. So
Right.
it's hard to get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, it certainly is, and you have, as you know, you kind of alluded to, you have there's some cultural issues that you come up against as well, in ways that you don't really expect. Yeah, certainly can be a challenge. So, Dan, I'm going to give you a superpower right now. So, if there was one thing you could snap your fingers today and change in terms of QC, not anything else, QC or QA, what would that be and why?
Wow. I think the superpower would be is that you would never have to run QC again.
Okay. Okay.
And I think the future systems and designs of these systems will have a load of sensors. It will have some great technology into it, abilities to self heal, to self calibrate, so you won't even miss a beat. So why even have to run QC? It could be understanding the deep algorithms between the sensors and the patients to say, yeah, oh, we noticed there's a little deviation, and it would auto QC itself by
Right.
running patients or the reagents themselves. I think there has to be a better way than stopping your entire workflow for the day, shutting everything down, running a QC, and then waiting for the results so you can process it again. It needs to be deeply integrated, and if we can do it without QC material, I know there's probably people who are QC vendors.
Yeah, they're rolling their eyes now.
They're like,
This could be controversial, I think, Dan.
yeah, they're just giving me the shifty eye or the shifty
Yeah.
ear at the moment, but
Yeah.
it's just a concept, and it doesn't mean that it's going away tomorrow. But I think there's really cool ways that we can maybe think about it as a reagent, or it's a pack, or it's incorporated into the reagent somehow. Like there's a better way to approach it. And then to add to that is that I can also see the future of QC being recorded in a way that no one has ever imagined it before. Because I think that's one of the big issues with the laboratory today, where they see this QC material, they run it, and they put it in a binder somewhere in the back, and they forget about it. And only when an inspector walks in, they pull it off the shelves, and
Right.
hopefully they remember to sign it off.
Right.
So there's other things that we can talk about for futures, is that recording of this information into like a blockchain structure. And if people don't know what blockchain is, with the cryptocurrencies and how they have it, but basically, in other words, it's an immutable record. So like
Right.
if I went into the hospital today and got a CBC, and they said, okay, and I got my results and everything looked normal, I would love to pinch and zoom into my results so deep that I would know the raw materials of that QC to see if it passed or it didn't pass, and how many times it did pass. So it becomes part of the patient record. And if we start having all of this information in this immutable record, this blockchain, then we can share this information with other vendors with a bigger data. So all of this starts becoming kind of open source and available, so people can do these actionable insights, and having these type of records that are in the right format, so they're just easily digested and able to help the bigger picture.
Well, I like how you think, Dan. I think that sounds like a good idea to me. So I'm not giving you the sideways eye for sure. All right. And unfortunately, with that, we've reached the end of our time today. Dan, thanks so much for joining me and giving me some really great insights on the QC and QA process. I know you've really opened my eyes, and I expect you did the same for our clinical lab audience as well. I also want to again thank your organization, Sysmex America, for sponsoring this special edition of Clinical Lab Chat. And as always, I want to thank you, the laboratorians, for listening and for all you do to contribute to the health of the public. You really are unsung heroes, and we're hoping that we're singing your song a little bit with Clinical Lab Chat. So look for more episodes of Clinical Lab Chat in the future, and visit us online at clpmag.com and on all of the major social media platforms. And until next time.